Good morning. It's the second day of our workshop, and as promised in the Voki from yesterday, today we were going to talk about tips for educators. Yesterday was about tips for the educational institution, so let's look at a couple. All right. Educators need to think about things when they teach military students. Once the students have been brought in, attracted by the institution, and I've just listed a few tips and techniques on this slide and the next one. And I'll just speak briefly to these. A lot of these tips and techniques will work well with all of your students, but thinking about this as a military student myself over time and what's worked for me and then what I expected when I was in the military, these are the ones that kind of stood out. Certainly your classes need to be designed so they're easy to navigate. That may go without saying, but if you're working on an online class in particular, this is important. Military students like to have clear expectations. It's kind of like getting a mission to go do something. The operations order for the mission will lay out very specific things, times and dates and locations and what's expected. Military students respond well to that. You need to also think about the fact that your students may not be located in the States. They may have internet issues, they may be sharing a computer, they may be using a military computer that's shared by all the guys in their unit, for example. So something that may be a cool web-based tool in an online class that would work well on campus might not work so well for a student that's in a tent with a mediocre bandwidth connection in Afghanistan. So you want to kind of keep things simple, and if you have questions about a tool that you put in your class, I would suggest asking the class. Use the tool and then say, if anybody's having trouble with this, please let me know. Flexibility is key. I mentioned that in the last announcement. If you have asynchronous online classes, those are generally the best. With the time zone differences around the world, it's really difficult for military students sometimes to log in at times that are convenient for other students. And think about your class resources. Do they actually use books or do they use online resources? If they use books, how are those books going to be delivered? This can be problematic and can take a long time. If they register for a class 3 or 4 weeks in advance, is there time to get the book mailed to them through the military mail system if they're overseas? Much better to use online resources if possible. If your school has a library that subscribes to online journals like ProQuest and things like that, that's often superior. And then certainly you want to have flexible policies yourself. I read a number of faculty syllabi in classes who say things like, late assignments will not be tolerated. Well, that's certainly idealistic, and we'd all like to say late assignments will not be tolerated. But when a student contacts you and says, his Humvee was destroyed by an explosive device in Iraq the night before, are you going to give him a little extra time to complete that assignment? Chances are that you are. So in your syllabus, you may want to talk about the fact that, certain circumstances may warrant extra time. Continuing on here, keep on top of discussions. Of course, this is good good advice for any instructor. It's sometimes military students may band together in a class and kind of create their own little clique. If you see that happening, you may want to assign students to different discussion groups so that you have a military student in each group and they don't kind of get together and, they need to learn by interacting with all students, not just themselves. It's a good idea to understand the culture and rank hierarchy and so forth of the military. You don't want to higher ranking military student trying to intimidate a lower ranking military student, for example, or you don't want a lower ranking student taking advantage of the fact that he's in class with a higher ranking member to kind of needle the higher ranking member. You don't need a military officer trying to intimidate you or throw his rank around, if you will. And there's some friendly rivalries between the services, but you don't want those to get out of hand in your discussions. Think about the fact that your students might have PTSD. The more you can learn about PTSD, the better, just to give you an idea of the symptomology of it and how it may manifest in class. Consider the resources that are at your disposal for dealing with PTSD. If you have a campus-based counseling center, that's great. If not, think about what online resources are available to you. Specifically, consider va.gov, which is the Veterans Administration website. They run the National Center for PTSD. There's a lot of great information in there for you and also for people with PTSD. When you are considering your topics for your discussions and so forth, think about how those topics might be perceived by your students, particularly if you're teaching a political science class, a history class. Sometimes topics can be taken out of context or perceived the wrong way. Just kind of put yourself in the head of the student and be careful about being insulting to anybody. And then next to last here, and this is one I encourage for all folks that teach military students, if you have any common ground with your students, if you served yourself, if your spouse has, if you're a military brat, even if you had an uncle that was in Vietnam or something, mention that up front, because any connection you can get with these folks will help them accept you. You may not be in the club, so to speak. You may not be in the military right now yourself, but chances are you have some connection, know somebody that has some military experience. And then finally, some students may challenge it. Military students, just like other students, can be hard-headed. They may have been through a lot, and so they may think, well, this is just a class. This isn't combat, so I'm going to take this teacher on and tell them I don't like this assignment. Why the heck are we doing this? Why should I do that? You're the boss. This is a civilian environment. They're not in charge. You are, and you own the grade book. And that's the most important thing. So those are my tips for you as the instructor to complement the tips I provided yesterday for institutions.